So I'm here with Felix Maradiaga. He is a human rights activist with a very long career in pushing for democracy in his native Nicaragua. He spent a considerable amount of time in jail for his political activities under the Ortega dictatorship. And he's also very interested in building a cadre of activists that can actually bring democracy to places like Nicaragua, Venezuela, other places in the world that are living under authoritarian regimes. So Felix, tell me a little bit about your hopes and plans for building, a cadre of people that can really work effectively in the world.
Thank you, Francis. Allow me to call you Francis because of our experience as colleagues at Freedom House. As I said before, I'm sure you hear that this all the time. It's truly an honor to be with Professor Fukuyama, who has been such an inspiration to many political scientists and activists around the world. Yeah, indeed, at the World Liberty Congress, we're trying to build what we call the WLC Academy. And the basic premise of this effort is the fact that dictators are working together. It's clearly there's not only the hand of China, in some parts of the world, Russia, Iran, they're collaborating. But when you look at the democratic ecosystems, pro-democracy activists, freedom fighters, human rights defenders, members of political parties who want to democratize their countries are not necessarily collaborating in the same way. So this is not only an effort to build a network, but also to empower these activists with the fundamental skills. And some of them are, some of these skills had to do a lot with understanding these global phenomena, but also some soft and hard skills. And in fact, since you allow me to also ask you questions, and maybe some people who are watching this video do not necessarily know that Stanford has one of the, I would say, the most important program on democracy, development and the rule of law, which is the summer program. And I've been fascinated not only by the level and the quality of the lectures, but also by the skills. So my question to you will be based on my passion on training is how can we bring these world-class ideas, lectures, all these lessons learned from academia to the activists around the world? Because sometimes it's very hard actually to bridge the gap between academia and grassroots activists.
Sure. Well, that's very important, and that's what we've been trying to do. I also have a program, in addition to what's now called the Fisher Family Summer Fellows Program that you are participating in here this summer at Stanford. I've been running something called the Leadership Academy for Development, which goes to different developing countries to try to train people in practical skills. So conventional academics are very good at analysis. They look at a problem, they gather data, and they say, well, this is the problem. What they don't do so well is actually give people the skills to bring about change under real-world circumstances where you're facing constraints, you need support, you need to know how to talk to people, you need to know how to build coalitions, you need to know how to neutralize those people that are opposing what you want to do. This is really stakeholder analysis that is critical. Every politician in human history has understood, that political power requires things like building coalitions, but oftentimes academics don't really help very much in communicating exactly how you do this. In fact, communication itself is really critical because people are not going to come to your side unless you can convince them. You're not going to convince them unless you can get them to trust you, especially in very polarized situations. And so it's really building those soft skills that I think is what we are trying to do in our different leadership programs.
And that's one of the things I've learned. I mean, you have this problem-solving framework, but you also use the case method. Could you please share with some of the experiences using the case method as a method of training?
Well, instead of just a lecture where you get up and read from a text to a group of a class of students, the case method is very interactive. And the best cases are ones like those from the Harvard Business School where you're focused on a specific decision maker and a specific decision. And if the answer is too obvious, it's not a useful or interesting case, so there should be a real policy dilemma. And what that does is it forces the participants to put themselves in the position of a leader who is trying to accomplish something, and have them think through, what the choices are, how you accomplish things in real-world circumstances. One important thing about cases is that they're very context-dependent. You learn all the details about some local, incident or problem in some particular country. It's not in order to learn best practices, because there is no such thing. I mean, things that work in one situation aren't going to work in another situation. What you want to learn is the technique for understanding your context in your country, in your city, in your neighborhood, and then being able to come up with a strategy to actually solve a problem. That's the real skill that we are trying to communicate.
So in terms of skills, one of the most concerning aspects that we're finding in the ecosystem of democracy is that polarization is affecting not only political parties, but it's also affecting activists.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the skills that are required to build common ground, to build alliances?
Mm-hmm. So we have a deliberative democracy lab here at Stanford, and I think they've learned a few things about polarization. First of all, stay off the internet. If you're just communicating via Twitter, you're never going to get anywhere, because it's that lack of personal human contact that I think encourages people to be uncivil, to be, insulting to people that they disagree with and the like. What the deliberative democracy lab does is to put people together in a situation where, they have to confront people that disagree with them directly. They're given a common set of facts that they can reason from, but I think that in actually talking to, human beings have evolved over, hundreds of thousands of years to be very social creatures, to pick up signals from body language, from the tone of voice, from all of these different things that human beings do. And if you actually have to deal personally with somebody, I think that is a first step in overcoming polarization. And that's, one of the things we try to do in our training.
One of the big questions as a trainer for activists, and thank you for all the help you have provided, but it's not often the case with other highly prestigious academic institutions, is how do we frame some of these findings, some of the lessons learned, some of the research that is done at top-notch level, at the doctoral level, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make these findings, these ideas,
Mm-hmm.
digestible for the average activist?
Well, first of all, academics have to come out of their bubbles. We love to have jargon that other academics can understand. And, a lot of social science research is now very quantitative, and people don't think statistically. That's not their first instinct. And so I think it's important to translate the findings that people using these high-powered techniques come up with, but making it, digestible to ordinary people. The way that people communicate, frankly, is very different than it was, when I was much younger. People don't even read newspapers and watch TV so much as communicate over the internet, and I think you need to reach them where they live and not where you'd like them to live.
So what academia can teach us about the diagnosis, but also about the actions against this democratic backsliding that we're having? Because, we have the diagnosis there. We know that it's happening. Is there reason for optimism?
Well, there's a lot of things I think that academia can contribute. One is just a historical knowledge. There's almost no situation in the world that is unique, and nobody's ever seen this before. And so having some historical awareness of comparable situations is, something that's quite useful, because you can look at mistakes that other people have made in the past, or you can see solutions that people have come up with that you might not otherwise have thought of. And I think that having a conceptual framework is important. If you're trying to build democracy, but you don't really understand what some of the basic structures of a democratic society are, like what does it mean to have rule of law? One thing that people get confused about is the difference between rule of law and rule by law, right? So China has rule by law where, the emperor just says, do this, don't do that, and you have to follow. But rule of law is a very different kind of situation where the emperor himself has to obey the law. And if the emperor doesn't do it, the emperor can lose, his throne. So there's some basic ideas in terms of what it means to build a real liberal democracy that I think are also important for activists to understand, even as they acquire the practical skills.
And along that line, we hear so much that dictators are collaborating among each other. They share mechanisms and lessons learned in terms of repression. Even some of the laws that we have seen in many parts of the world, such as the foreign agent law, were tried by Putin originally, and so on. The counter argument to that is that pro-democracy activists are not collaborating as much as we should. Would you agree with that assessment? And if so, what can we do about it?
Well, we've had many examples where pro-democracy forces may have outnumbered their opponents, but they couldn't work together effectively. There's too much individualism. Many of the leaders of these movements are prima donnas that really don't want to share the spotlight with other people. There's no easy solution to that except to, teach people that if you don't have a coalition, if you can't submerge your own ego in a collective endeavor, you're never going to get anywhere. And I think that, we've had some examples of people working together. In the Polish election of October 2023, you had a broad array of more liberal parties, and they actually figured out a way to come up with a common platform, even though they disagreed, that defeated the populist Law and Justice Party. In the French second round election for the National Parliament in the summer of 2024, the non-populist parties came to an agreement to withdraw the weaker candidates so that they would win the maximum number of seats. And that's something that, similar parties have not done in the past, and that allowed them to prevent Marine Le Pen's, national rally from taking power. So these are kind of historical lessons of collaboration that I think are important.
Off camera, we spoke about nonviolence and training in nonviolence, which I think we all agree is an important skill for activists. And you gave me some very insightful comments about nonviolence. And of course, you and I are fully in the side of nonviolence. So I'll make that disclaimer that we're not advocating for democratic change through means that are not non-democratic and violent. But I think that nonviolence should be revisited, both as a discipline and also in terms of these skills. Please share some of those reflections.
Well, nonviolence works the best when you are opposing a regime that is, to some degree democratic and liberal. So, for example, the long struggle for national independence in India was against a British colonial regime. It was authoritarian, but it was also British. And so, they had certain norms of fair play, and they could listen to arguments and the like. And I think, the whole nonviolence program really got its start in a place like India. It wouldn't work in Stalin's Russia. It wouldn't work, I think, under Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua.
Absolutely not, yeah.
So not to advocate violence, but sometimes, techniques, you need to develop techniques, where your protests are things that really are going to get heard and they're going to attract attention. You need to be able to attract the attention of international actors, and that sometimes requires, going beyond simply politely making arguments and saying, please let us vote, or please let us, listen to what we have to say.
Scaling up these efforts is quite a challenge. I mean, we are at this fascinating fellowship here at Stanford, and I think this probably each year was the most fellows you've had in a year.
Well, in the summer fellows, we have about 25, and then in the Leadership Academy we do more because we go around to a lot of.
So even that is a limited number, and we're
Yeah.
quite lucky to be here. But that's not the case for many other activists around the world that will definitely benefit of this opportunity. How do you scale up, or how could you scale up these efforts?
So I think there are really two ways. First of all, you can train trainers. I think that we work with other educational institutions. Not everybody knows how to do case study teaching or write case studies. Not everybody understands the importance of implementation and kind of thinking about the real world politics of particular situations. But the main thing is technology, because we have the internet now. Actually, people learn much better by watching a video rather than reading, an article or a book. And I think that, probably you need the face-to-face interaction, because human beings just, they can read each other's motives and emotions much better in person. But you can also combine that with technology and have a hybrid program where part of it is in person and part of it is online, and then deliver content to much larger groups of people by, using both techniques.
So if you imagine, let's say, the syllabus of this program, and I don't mean to put you on the spotlight, because I know that you've been working on that and it's not yet completed, but I think it will be very interesting to find an online program that could serve both the purposes of an activist, but also be culturally appropriate even for different languages.
Yeah.
Because I think that's also one challenge. So trying to find a syllabus that could be taught in Latin America, in Asia, in Europe. What are some of the most generic skills? And I know that you already spoke a little bit about the problem solving, but I'm sure there's.
So this we'll put this up in a bigger scale in the video, but we have this problem solving framework that is generic. So it begins with identifying the problem. You have to pick a problem that is important, but it's also solvable. You can't talk about eliminating all corruption in country X, but you might talk about eliminating corruption in the justice ministry or in procurement or something like that. The second really has to do with solution development. So you want to avoid this tendency to say there's one ideal solution that we have to go with, because the ideal solution may not be implementable. And that's where the third circle comes in. So you've got an implementation circle that is really about how do you build a coalition, how do you manage stakeholders so that you get the kind of political support that you need, how do you overcome opponents and obstacles, how do you communicate, how do you convince people that your solution is workable and that it's going to be something that they can buy into, and finally, how do you develop the resources that are necessary to bring about what you want to do. And this is something I think that anyone, cross-culturally needs to confront, and they've got to apply this in their circumstances, with all the particular historical, cultural, personal kinds of details that you have to operate within.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you also mentioned that you want to ask me some questions, so I'm going to also make this.
Well, okay, so your experience as an activist, your experience in going to jail, how do you communicate that, and how do you teach about how to deal with the sorts of challenges that you've had to deal with?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question because I don't have an easy answer. And the very candid response is that I have not been able to bridge that gap yet. So a lot of the things that I teach are, I wouldn't say unrelated to my personal experience, but contrary to the recommendation of many of my colleagues at places like University of Virginia, in which we have this collaboration for the project End Arbitrary Detention, in which we try to train families of political prisoners and activists with a very high probability of getting arrested, how to deal with this issue.
That was something very interesting that you were talking about, that oftentimes it's the pressure on the family member that's the biggest lever that the regime has over you.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to take your question as an opportunity to say that the most compelling and effective method of training activists is when you connect emotionally with the cause, where the activist knows that he or she is not listening to a person who is a technocrat or a traditional academic. Is a person that has the skin of the game and and believes in the cause. And I think this is what makes this center and the work you and people like Larry and others are doing, that we feel that we are on the same page. But going back to your question, I am preparing a book on arbitrary detention. And I think that one of the areas that requires more research right now is what happens in these very risky situations when the activist is arrested, because as much as you can prepare, nothing prepares you for that. But we have found certain skills, and one of them is precisely making your family and your movement a part of the process when a political activist is detained.
I see, yeah. I remember Leopoldo Lopez in Venezuela. He spent, I think, 5 years in prison,
Yes.
and he had similar insights about dealing with that kind of situation, and it's something that's completely beyond the experience, I think, of certainly the vast majority of academics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that many of the other skills that you have mentioned, and which are, of course, fundamental for what I would call the syllabus of activists, it's there, but nothing prepares you for prison. So going back to your previous question, I think that that's the most difficult part. And it doesn't have to be necessarily so extreme as the cases that people like Leopoldo and I and many others have experienced. We are talking about things such as what we call financial repression, which is regimes are expropriating assets, bank accounts, properties, and that's a shock for many activists or members of opposition parties. How do you organize an opposition in exile? That's another set of skills and abilities that are not learned at a traditional, a training center. How do you develop mental strength, resilience? How do you take care of the mental health of your relatives, and so on? So we are trying to fill the gap of knowledge in these fields that are non-traditional. And we found many lessons learned from outside of political science, by the way, which I think it's also an important insight. That when you have these multidisciplinary collaboration, you can build more robust trainings.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's great. I hope that we can work together in the future and build a really practical set of learning tools that will help people really push for democracy around the world and reverse some of those trends.
Thank you so much, Francis.
Okay, thank you, Felix. Very good.